Hello, I'm Alex. Welcome to my channel. So today I have another story for you. So this one is actually about someone that I had met before. Way back in 2006, I went with my sister and mother to Brazil to meet this particular person. He had all this fame that was building up. He wasn't as famous at that time in 2006, but a few years later, celebrities from all over the world knew who this guy was. So his name is John, or João in Portuguese down in Brazil. But what I'll do is I'll tell some of the story of my experience and of his chronological story. And I'll go from the beginning, go to the end, and give some of my commentary in between. So let's get started. João Teixeira de Faria. He was born in June 1942 in a small town in Brazil, in the region of Goiás. While growing up, people described him as very social, personable. He was a guy's guy, he had friends, and he would go around. People claim that he womanized, machismo kind of guy, just kind of had this hubris about him. When he was actually describing his childhood, João said that he was just a simple farmer, that he was just working in this rural environment, probably just seeing cattle, tending to them, and to other agriculture type activities. But if you're kind of wondering what really was going on in the culture there in Brazil, in old-timey Brazil, you had shamans or medicine men, and a lot of this Catholicism that came in from overseas, they kind of mixed that together. So what you would have is these old traditions mixed with newer traditions or European traditions. So in this area where João is living, there aren't really any hospitals in the sense that, hey, you can go and get an antibiotic and do all these types of things. It was more herbology. They would take herbs and they would hope that that would cure them because, hey, that's all they had, so what could they do? So just imagine, you don't have a hospital around. The best thing you have is the person that has knowledge about herbs and other types of things. Because really it's either that or you're in a lot of trouble. So João growing up in this particular culture away from Rio de Janeiro and Brasilia, which had more of a medical infrastructure for helping patients, he got more interested into helping people a more traditional way by use of herbs and other faith-based healing methods. So João, he started performing these surgeries with dirty instruments like dirty scissors and rusty tools. And in Brasilia, despite them being in the middle of nowhere, according to law, you cannot perform these types of things without a medical license. But he was doing it, so people were stopping him. He actually got arrested a few times. They beat him up. They persecuted him, but he kept on doing it. It seemed like he was very motivated to go about helping people in this way. And it seemed that a lot of people were being helped. There were people that had ailments, that he had operated on them, reportedly healing people of heart issues, cancer, being blind. This is kind of the stuff that you're reading in the Bible or something like that from an apostle, not from a person that's living in a village in Brazil in the middle of nowhere. And according to João, someone by the name of Chico Javier reached out to him and told him, you got to be doing these healings full time. You need to have a place in Abajana, which is a village even more out of the middle of nowhere. I've been there, so there's really nothing. You have mud, architecture. There's not a whole lot going on out there. And Chico Javier was saying that you got to be a medium. If you don't know what a medium is, it's a person that uses their body as kind of a receptacle for spirits to go inside of it. So basically to take over their body and go about doing things and to relinquish any control of their normal use of their body. So the purpose of doing this was to allow saints or other entities to perform miracles and heal people. And that was supposedly the mission that João was called to do, allegedly. So João sets up this place in Abajana called the Casa de Dom Ignacio de Loyola, who is a Catholic missionary who lived in the 1500s that is going to give all this power to João while he's performing all these miracles. So in being a medium, he's proclaiming himself to be a medium who is channeling this saint to perform these miracles. So there were many people, if you look at this video, or many of these videos, he's performing these surgeries with these instruments that are not clean. I mean, it's not something that you would have approved by the medical community or in a hospital for that matter. I mean, if you had done this under normal circumstances, I mean, you would probably get an infection. But according to many of the spectators and the people that received these treatments, they claimed they were healed. These were people that had tumors in their brain or had heart conditions or had other kinds of cancers. They claimed that João was the real deal, that he was really being healed. And João said, hey, it wasn't me, it was God. It was an entity that went through him as him being a medium and allowed for this to happen, that he was just merely the receptacle of these healing powers. And people were adoring him. His fame was building up over time. So you just had a few people that were visiting him at this casa, and then over a few more years, you would have thousands of people coming and flocking from all over the world.
Em nome de Deus, os médicos, as pessoas que sentam na corrente, vamos entrar para começar.
So he was starting all of this alleged healing in the 70s, and in the later 70s, he moved to Abidjan. Because remember, I was telling you earlier, he was being persecuted and thrown in jail because he was practicing medicine without a license. There's some speculation the reason why he went to Abidjan was to avoid the authorities from arresting him, because Brasilia is a few hours away, and the police probably didn't want to go that far to bother with him. Because if he were to have been doing this in Rio de Janeiro or Brasilia, it would have been a lot riskier for him. Even though João wasn't charging money for these healing sessions, he was charging for these little capsules of passion flower in these little canisters. I actually bought some of these when I was there, and you don't necessarily get any healing from that. It's prescribed to you once you go through the line to see João. He says, okay, I'm going to heal you. I'm either going to touch you or use one of these medical instruments and do this and that, and then your tumor is gone or your medical problem is gone. And then this passion flower is just a means to follow up on that treatment or to kind of confirm it. According to some of the financial records that they found out later, is João, he made in excess of $10 million a year on these passion flower capsules. I remember they were something like $10 or $15. They weren't really that cheap, but when you have thousands of people coming through here a day, it really racks up. So if he's doing this frequently all throughout the year, that's going to be a lot of money. And for a lot of people, they felt that it was worth it because they had cancers or other ailments and they were going to see this guy, João, and their problems, their ailments had gone away. They didn't know how to explain it, so they thought it had to have been faith-based, that maybe it was a placebo or maybe it really was God or these saints or entities that were helping them. And people were just adoring this guy. They just couldn't get enough of him. He was starting to be noticed by people all over the world who were writing books about him, putting videos of him on YouTube, as you can see here, that I'm showing you, and people such as Oprah, people in the Catholic community, including the Pope at the time, John Paul. Apparently he had known about him. I mean, this guy was on the map as far as the religious world is concerned, and in many popular celebrities. Who knows who he had seen in private? Bill Clinton supposedly saw him. Maybe some other politicians or high-profile figures saw him, and they didn't necessarily reveal who they were, but I'm sure it was somebody that didn't want to be put into this fringe idea. There are a lot of people out there that don't want to be seen with this guy because they don't want to kind of mess with their reputation. And that was probably pretty smart, because if you find out later in this video, which I'll go over, he's not really that great of a guy to be associated with, and I'll tell you why. So before he got really big, I actually went to Brazil because my sister said, hey, you got to read this book. And I had read this book that was in English that said this John of God, João de Deus, was living in this village healing people. And I thought it was quite interesting. So I went with her and my mother to Brazil, and it was in January 2005. We went to Brasilia and we took a taxi to Abajana and we stayed at a little hotel there. And there it's called a posada. It's a very humble village. It was kind of a lot of things that are made out of clay or dirt or cob houses. You would probably call them that in Europe, which a lot of them, I mean, they're pretty sturdy houses. Even if it's not built out of concrete, is made out of the right kind of clay and materials, then it can last for a while. And that's just how this town was built. I remember the posada or the hotel, it cost around 50 or 40, maybe even less per day. It wasn't that much. I remember it wasn't that much in 2005 money or 2006 money. It was relatively cheap. You could go and eat tropical fruit. I mean, it seemed like a pretty nice vacation. But when we actually went to the Casa de Dom Ignacio to meet João, I mean, there were thousands of people there. And part of the idea or the protocol to go there is you have to wear all white. I had to wear white. My mother and sister, we had to wear white if we wanted to go in there and partake in this shamanic mediumship type of experience with João. So we were in this line and we were just waiting to see João. And then all around, as you can see in this video, people just sitting there praying or meditating, whatever they were doing. These are people from all over the world of different faiths. They're either Hindu, Muslim, or Buddhist, or Christian, Catholic, or atheist. The list goes on. Just all sorts of people were there. And when I finally got to João, he said something in Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese, so I don't really know exactly what he said, but he said something to me in Portuguese and prescribed passion flower to me. So those little capsules, of course I said I bought them and I ingested them. I was very skeptical because I didn't really feel anything really. I'm a pretty skeptical person, so when I see somebody like this, I kind of lean towards the, hey, this is a charlatan kind of explanation, because I'm not a person that likes to just believe whatever, because I wasn't really that convinced. I didn't actually see the surgeries happen with my own eyes. On these videos, you can see these surgeries happening. You can see the scraping and the fidgeting with these instruments that are supposedly doing some kind of work. I didn't get that, and I didn't see it, but to be honest, I was pretty upset. I was kind of disenchanted by the experience, but I did like being in Brazil. Brazil's a very beautiful country, and that was the best part about the experience. But aside from that, I wasn't really that impressed. I talked to a few people while I was there, and there were really interesting people there. I mean, the people that are very open-minded, they're just looking for something in their life, some adventure, or they have some kind of terminal illness. I met people that had cancer. Remember this one Irish man, he was singing these old Irish songs, and he had cancer. He had lived there, I think he was there for several weeks, and he just said that this was his last chance to try to save himself. So I thought that okay, it makes sense. If things are really that bad, if you're terminally ill and you don't think you're going to live that much longer, might as well give this a shot, right? Because a lot of other people claim that it was working for them. Not everybody, but quite a few people. They claim that these actions and these surgeries conducted by João were actually helping them. So if it works, right? There's really no explanation for everything. Science can't explain everything. They could say it's placebo effect, or for those that are more religious, perhaps they can say it's faith, it's God that's healing them. And I'm fairly open-minded when it comes to that. I do believe in something higher than ourselves, and I think that God can heal people, and science can't explain everything. So it's not always so black and white when it comes to trying to use reason and logic, especially in these kinds of cases when it's life or death. So I had gone home after being a week there, and actually it was a few years later in 2010, Oprah Winfrey, at this time she was really big in the news still. She had not really retired yet. She's retired more now. You don't really hear a lot about her now, but at that time she was a big name. And she actually was promoting João. saying that this guy is amazing. Look at all the stuff he was doing. She actually went there personally and just thought, man, this is an interesting guy. This is the real deal. Or it seems to be that way, right? The way that she's kind of presenting him here, promoting him seemingly on her show. But it seemed like things were going well for João and his casa in Abajana. But it wasn't until 2014 that the cracks and the seams really started to show in his whole operation. And these cracks were shown by 60 Minutes Australia. They have a really great YouTube channel. I highly recommend watching that. They have great investigators where they really get down and deep into certain practices, and they don't take crap from anybody. So really what's great is in this particular investigation, they found out that there were claims of sexual assault that João had allegedly perpetrated, as well as people that had gotten worse in their medical conditions, saying that they were hiding some of these things that didn't make them look good, and that there were a few people that actually died there, and that they were put under the rug, and authorities really didn't investigate it, because from what could be seen is that João and this group of people, his inner circle, they had control over this whole town of Abajana. They had control over the posada, the hotels, the businesses going there. So, with mafiosos in a town, what they do is they get a hold of a whole neighborhood by saying, hey, I need to get 10% of all your earnings. And that is something that they were doing. They were getting a cut of everything. They didn't have any street vendors. They didn't have anybody doing any kind of business there unless João got a piece of the action.
Well, let me ask you then, have you ever sexually assaulted any of your followers? Could anyone interpret that for me?
His team refused to translate my question.
John of God, could we ask you a few more questions, please?
No.
I mean, these are...
No.
Just to properly understand exactly who you are.
Suddenly silent, he waited until he was around the corner, away from the camera, to insult our interpreter as she was translating my question.
Have you ever sexually assaulted any of your followers?
Já houve algum assédio sexual do senhor?
Da sua mãe.
When she asked if he'd sexually assaulted anyone, he stared her down and said, "Your mother."
So he responded to my question, of which there are very serious allegations and police
Insulting
records,
my mother.
that he insulted you.
Yes.
And you're just translating the question for me.
Yes, I was just translating.
That's a good mark of a man, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So remember when I said I went there all the way back in 2006? It wasn't until 2018 that things really started to mount in pressure against João. And this had to do with sexual assaults from many, many women. So remember when I said that I had to wait in the line to actually get to João? And there were times where the people said, you got to close your eyes. Don't look too much on what he's doing. And there was a reason why. He was actually touching women inappropriately, allegedly, during these times when people had their eyes closed. And he actually brought these ladies, allegedly, to those back rooms of his and assaulted them, unfortunately, in horrible ways. And I know this is very triggering for a lot of people. I apologize, and actually I will put a link below in the description to show if there's any abuse or anything like that that you need help with. I would highly recommend going through these channels to make that report in any of those cases. So João, being a person, a spiritual leader, nobody is above these types of laws for basically holding these people to account. So these people, they need to have accountability for their actions, and no matter if they're healing people or not, the exchange of certain favors shouldn't be used for this supposed healing that he was giving to people. And what's really sad is he was doing this to his own daughter. He was actually controlling his daughter, saying that you're mine, you got to do what I tell you to do, and he assaulted her regularly when she was a child, a minor, under the age of 16, and he did it for years, and she actually tried to escape from him by hiding in different parts of Brazil, but with all of his money and power, he was always able to find her, and this is very sad. And the daughter, she ended up getting into drugs and really hard stuff to, according to her, to try to forget all of the abuse that she had suffered from her father. And very sadly, I mean, at least she's still alive, but she's got a lot of work to do. She's got a lot of healing to do, and my heart goes out to her. And what's worse is there were other rumors and other things that were actually coming out that he had this 1,000-acre property around Abidjan or out in the outskirts, and apparently there were these horrible things going on at this ranch, and he employed a lot of people, and these were people that were his bodyguards, kind of thug types that would go around and push people around or threaten them if they were to speak ill of João. And this particular farm, it held a lot of women slaves, allegedly, that were having children there on the premises that João and his employees would sell to Europeans. So there was a human trafficking scheme happening in Brazil under the nose of the authorities, or if there were any authorities involved, they were paid to keep quiet, because this guy was making more than $10 million a year just by selling passion flower. And that, I mean, people were actually estimating that he was making upwards of $40 million a year on his best years. And he was keeping a lot of this money for himself. He wasn't paying his volunteers that were there. These people that weren't wearing these white shirts and walking around, as you can see here, following him around, they're not really getting much money. They're just being given the chance to help out. And it's really horrible. This particular guy right here, he was crying when he was hearing about all this news about his João, and he's still there to this day. And it's very sad because he's got his own family, but he's dedicated his life to the Casa. And despite the fact that all of this stuff has been coming out, he's still thinking that this is his obligation to stay here, to hold this place, hold the doors open for all those that want to come and get healed of their ailments. So after all this had come out and all these investigators were delving into all this, more women were coming out, and upwards of 600 counts from women of abuse from João. I mean, it's staggering, and it could have been a lot more. And unfortunately, a lot of these things, according to the statute of limitations, they couldn't be used against João, just more of the recent ones. And I mean, it was enough, because by the time of when Netflix came out with a documentary in 2021, just a year after he was actually getting sentenced to 19 years, but then they were just racking up the years. It's actually more than a few hundred years now, because with all these accounts of human trafficking, abuse, I mean, he can't get out now. It's impossible. But the really disconcerting thing about all of this is that he was sentenced, but he's been spending time at home. If you can see here, he's sitting on a comfortable couch. He has an ankle monitor, and he's monitored. Even though he can't really go outside and just do what he did before, he is somewhat comfortable, right? He can watch the television, he can read a book, he can breathe fresh air. He's not in a stanky concrete, cell with a puddle in the corner and having to defecate in front of his cellmate. No, he's got probably his posse around him that he's probably giving money to do business for him. Who knows what he's actually doing? Because I would actually like to know what is really going on. Because if he's at home, what kind of contact does he have with the outside world? Does he still have contact with his thugs? Is he still getting an income? Is he still able to reach certain people in the international community to commit certain sins? And at this point, it seems to be sins in his world, because he's a religious leader, and pretty much everything he's doing is, I guess you could say, is evil. I don't know how else you would put it, because a normal person just going about and doing things and robbing a store or doing that's like a crime, and that's just bad actions from a person that maybe had a bad background or a bad upbringing. But this guy was very manipulative, calculating in everything that he did. So at this point, I think we've already breached the level of a criminal to evil doer. This is a person that has exceeded all of those thresholds. I mean, it's It's unbelievable. So again, sorry about all this. It's an intense subject. For those that have faith or don't have faith, this subject matter is rather intense. So my apologies, but it's just something that I feel like should get out there, and people got to make sure that they follow the right leader, right? You don't want to just blindly follow somebody, because there were thousands of people. There were people all over the world that got fooled by this guy. Yeah, it's really disconcerting, but I'm really hoping that people can use this as a cautionary tale to go about their religious or spiritual lives in a more, let's say, discerning and critical way. And just because you criticize something doesn't mean you're disrespecting it. It just means that you really hold your standards high and you don't just put your trust into everybody. If you're religious, put your trust into God. Don't put it into a guy that claims to be a representative of God, because we don't really know if he's a true representative of a holy entity of God. We don't really know. So let this be a cautionary tale, and that's all I got to say about that. So that pretty much is it for this video. I will certainly update you if there's anything else that I can find out about this João guy, but currently as it stands, he seems to be evading justice. Even though he isn't in a cell, he's at home, and he seems to be enjoying the good life and enjoying some of the riches that he had acquired. Even though they had seized some of his riches, he seems to be living in somewhat of comfort. So be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel, because there'll be more cases that I'll be getting into, and until then, I will see you on the next video.